Thank you. Thank you. Great to be back here again in Glenties on a fine July evening. Thank you very much. Since we last met, we've had a general election, and out of that there was no clear result, with the consequence that you have a very different kind of government now, what I call a partnership government, because of the decision of the people. And to deal with the decision of the people, the party that I lead, the Fine Gael party, the most votes and most seats, unable to form a government on its own, we've put together a partnership government, which means that we have a programme of over 600 commitments with members of the government who are of independent parties, and we have a supply and confidence agreement with the main opposition party, the Fianna Fáil party, to deal with issues of budgets, appointments of members of the government, and so on. This is a programme that's predicated on a 5-year term, with 3 budgets to be included and a review at the end of 2018. Lessons to be learned from that recent election are obviously the need for a more caring face from government, and to use the fruits of an economy for the benefit of all the people, to deal with the issues of social injustice, unfairness, inequality, and so on. That's why tomorrow we launch the housing programme, which will be launched by the Minister for Housing, Local Government and Planning, to deal with the question of homelessness, of affordable housing, of social housing, and so on. That's why on Wednesday I hope to go back down to the north inner city, an area devastated over many years, but in particular in recent years by those involved in criminal activities. I've been down there a few times talking to people in all walks of life, some really committed people, to give an opportunity to their families and to their children, and we hope to address that on Wednesday. Last week we had the paternity benefit bill, which will allow for fathers of children to be able to have a benefit not available before, and also we put through the requirements both in terms of the electoral register and the requirements for the formation of a citizens' assembly, to look at the question of reflection on the Eighth Amendment, which is an issue that has been raising some concern and stress for a number of people for a number of years. I would say that when we look back at 2016 and years to come, for me I think one thing that's really important is that Ireland has looked at itself over the last 100 years in a very different way, and that we appreciate what our flag now stands for. We appreciate the journey that many of those people went on from the late 1800s right through to 1916, in the centre point of the Great War, and that these first fledgling steps towards economic, political and social independence were a time of great trial and tribulation for Ireland. But I think the involvement of everybody in an inclusive way, north and south, gave a comprehensive reflection on the events of 100 years ago, and to imagine the start of the journey for the next 100 years. I find that the amount of publications of new historic information, of the stories of families, make us all understand in a far greater way what it was and what it is to be Irish, and to have been part of that journey as we move on ahead now. Also, I think, though, that in a very real way, when you look at the greater world beyond these shores and see the uncertainty that exists in many countries and the difficulties that there are politically arising from radicalisation, from ultra-wing politics, right or left, the incidents in San Bernardino and Orlando and Dallas and now in Baton Rouge, in Nice, in Paris, in Brussels and other places around the world where tragic incidents occur almost on a daily basis now, where vigilance is so important, and where the need for a steady hand in terms of the kind of politics we want to practice, the kind of country we want to have, the kind of opportunities we need to give to our people, and understand that if you leave huge swathes of cities to their own intent over a period of many years, it's difficult to appreciate that you can have model citizens coming from all of these areas, which means that governments have got to reflect on on using the benefits of rising economies to treat social injustice and social inequality and give everybody an opportunity. And that's why, while it's always difficult to project what might happen in politics, I think few people actually appreciated the scale of the consequence of the referendum in the United Kingdom on the question as to whether to stay or whether to leave as a member of the European Union. We've had long negotiations over 50 years for countries to join the European Union, originally the Economic Community and the Common Market. We've never had a case of where a country has decided to leave. That decision has been taken by the electorate in the United Kingdom, Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and is now to be implemented by the British government. It's not the decision that I wanted or that we wanted here, but you have to respect the decision made by the electorate. And the government recognised that the decision made is final and is now planning for a future without the United Kingdom being a formal member of the European Union within a few short years. We always knew that this was possible, but it's difficult to be ready for all of the challenges that arise as a consequence. Political events in Britain have moved swiftly since then. The original intention was that when the Prime Minister decided to stand down, that there would be a replacement in by October. That became September, and obviously with the withdrawal of the second candidate, it meant that the Prime Minister, Theresa May, is now elected as the new Prime Minister, the second woman Prime Minister in the history of Great Britain, and we wish her every success and congratulate her on her election. I spoke to her the night just after she was appointed. Obviously, we reflected on the very strong relationships between Ireland and England, the fact that with the previous Prime Minister, David Cameron, we signed a memorandum of understanding in Downing Street, have reviewed that every year since, have had senior officials from our government meet with senior officials from the British government on a regular basis to discuss all of these issues. And connections and contacts have been at an exceptionally high level over that period. So when I spoke to the new Prime Minister, I agreed that we should continue to work on developing the relationships between Ireland and Britain, including the peace process, the question of trade between our two countries, the fact that we are co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement, which brought about peace after so many years of trials and troubles in Northern Ireland, and in progressing also the cooperation under the Ireland-UK joint statement. I travelled to Berlin last week to talk to Chancellor Merkel, to acquaint her with what our priorities are, which she now fully understands. Obviously, these are the issues like the common travel area, the fact that we have a unique relationship with Great Britain over so many years, but also that we bring a particular relevance to the negotiations which will inevitably take place. It's not as if we were a country far removed from the United Kingdom, with the land border, if you like, that was there, obviously is an issue that's of close, consideration for us here. And given the fact that we have 50,000 Irish people on the boards of British companies, that almost 1 million people live there, that our people were entitled to vote in this referendum, means that we have a very unique understanding of the British personality and of the British citizen. In fact, when I was over there in Liverpool and in Manchester, quite recently, just before the tragic murder of the MP, and talking in Glasgow, obviously there were great concern in various parts of England about how the referendum might actually go. So I spoke to Chancellor Merkel and appraised her of the fact that we bring a unique perspective to the negotiations which will take place. Now, everybody here, I know, sympathises, and rightly so, with the incident that occurred in Nice, where 84 people were killed wantonly on the boardwalk, on the promenade, enjoying themselves on France's National Day. This is, beyond comprehension as to why anybody would do this. And obviously, given our connections with France over the centuries, it's a deeper blow. So, having signed a book of condolence this morning myself, and will again tomorrow in Dublin, I will welcome President Hollande in Dublin on Thursday, while he's still coming here, both for a meeting with myself and with the President, and we want to talk about the negotiations which will take place in time ahead. But I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody when we say that we sympathise and offer our deepest sympathies to the families of those who were killed in Nice, and offer our condolences to the French people. France is a huge country with a massive security operation, and yet these things are almost impossible to deal with, and vigilance is of utmost importance. So I'll also attend on Friday at the British Irish Council in Cardiff. British Irish Council is made up of representatives from Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man. And obviously the representatives there reflect on the ongoing economic situation, and clearly this meeting is particularly about the Brexit situation and the consequence of that vote. So it's fair to say that the stakes have always been higher on this issue for Ireland than for any other EU member state. In fact, many of the economic papers done would indicate that Ireland would suffer adversely the most, and Northern Ireland in particular. The reasons are well known. The economy and the relative importance of the trade markets either way. There are 200,000 people in the Republic who are dependent for their jobs and exports to Britain, and vice versa from Britain into the Republic. Northern Ireland, the peace process and the British-Irish relations, these are so important for everybody. The common travel area and our shared land border, the fact that we've had that common travel area since 1922, and it has worked very well when both countries were outside the European Union, when both countries were inside the European Union, but has not been tested when one is outside and one is inside. Obviously, the role of the UK within the European Union and its strategic value to Ireland in that context. We have always worked closely together with common ambitions, while we have our trading links over and back across the Irish Sea, 1.2 billion a week. Obviously, in terms of European issues, we also have had a common agenda on many of the problems that have been discussed and talked about there. So we've been very active throughout the entire process in engaging with the UK government and with our EU partners, outlining our concerns and our interests, and we will continue to do that. So our primary goal is now to protect and to advance those interests. We set up a section in my own department of the Taoiseach last year dealing with preparatory work for contingency plans that you might actually have to implement if the decision were to be to leave, which is what happened. So we've got a whole of government contingency framework within which we will continue to track and develop the key policy issues that will arise in terms of these negotiations. I'd be asking every minister to give me a perspective from their department's point of view and what they see as the challenges arising from this decision. Also the state agencies, how they see the time ahead, because it's very unclear at the moment as to what the eventual outcome will be. But their key areas are those of trade, energy interconnection, social welfare arrangements, where many thousands of people in Ireland draw their pensions from England, having worked over there as navvies, well known to you in Donegal, or vice versa, where people from Britain living in Ireland are drawing pensions in the same way. We have education and research cooperation. These are things that are so important for us. Clearly, under the Horizon 2020 programme, Ireland has 500 partnerships with British universities and colleges of technology, science areas, researchers and so on. And many of these have already been informed that kind of backing from the European Commission will cease in due course. These are serious implications for what it is that we do. There may be some advantage for Ireland, but clearly these are things that might not have been thought of by the average voter when they went to cast their stroke, irrespective of what they voted. So our contingency management arrangements will prioritise the political and strategic issues that are going to arise as we see them for Northern Ireland, the common travel area, the border, and the issues of the Republic here. So we don't know what the outcome is going to be yet, because you don't have a statement of intent as to what Britain actually wants here. So a new Prime Minister is installed. She deserves time to reflect on this, to consult with her party and the Commons, but we do need to know what is it that Britain actually wants here. What kind of an arrangement is their objective? Is it a Norwegian type arrangement? Is it a Swiss type arrangement? Is it a Canadian type arrangement? Is it a Singaporean type arrangement? Or is it something different? From our point of view, we have very clear ideas as to what that arrangement should be. But we will obviously scale up our own involvement with the IDA, Enterprise Ireland, the different agencies that we have that are dealing with Ireland abroad and with Ireland in the UK. This decision was made now by the British electorate, and it's going to be followed through. And there are implications all over the world as a consequence for that. So I've decided to make some changes myself in the department of the Taoiseach. So what I'm going to do this week, next week, establish a new cabinet committee with a second Secretary General dealing with that, specifically focused on Brexit, to oversee the economic impact of what's involved here and to guide, if you like, the overall government response, including both the economic impact, the negotiations at European level, and with the administrations in London and in Belfast. In my own department of the Taoiseach, the existing European Union, British Irish and Northern Ireland and international divisions will be integrated under that second Secretary General. This will ensure that we have a comprehensive and integrated approach to what it is that we have to do. And we will also increase staffing in our other offices abroad, in London, in Paris, in Berlin, in Rome, and in the offices abroad on the greater world. We need to enhance our trade promotion capacity, because you're going to need new markets in order to sell Irish products to different countries. And this is something that we've been at for some time. As you'll be aware, in the period of the last government, we achieved consensus on opening the US market for Irish beef, the Japanese market for specialised cuts, and the Chinese market, particularly for milk powder and baby foods and so on, because of the integrity of what it is that we produce here from a grass-based agri sector. And I might say that the agri and food sector is of particular importance in terms of the British market. So that's something that we need to be very careful of. So I attended the meeting of the European Council, that is the heads of government, heads of state and government of all the 28 countries on the 28th of June. There were 28 members at that. On the 29th of June, for the first time in 40 years, there were only 27, because the British Prime Minister of the day, David Cameron, had left. The outcome was clear, given the circumstance that you didn't actually know what the objective of Britain will be at that point. So Article 50 of the European treaties is the article that triggers a country's wish to withdraw. And until that happens, the negotiations to withdraw don't actually commence. So it is a matter for the country that is leaving to trigger that article. And it was agreed at the European Council of the 27 that that would be the way that it would be, and that would be the only legal framework for withdrawal. And the UK must trigger that by notifying the European Council formally that it intends to follow through on the decision of the British people to withdraw and not be a member of the European Union once those negotiations would cease. But the Council felt that the triggering of Article 50 should proceed ahead reasonably quickly, not just immediately, to give the new Prime Minister some time to reflect on this, but that it should not drag too long, because, believe me, that will cause, or would cause, difficulties for a number of European countries and for financial institutions, because they need certainty in the way that they plan. Secondly, the decision was that while the European Commission have all of the experience of dealing with countries that wish to join the European Union, they will now use that experience for a country that wishes to leave the European Union. But because the Commission is a non-directly elected body by the people, the European Council, that is the heads of state and government, will be responsible for the political oversight of this, because they are the people who are actually elected as heads of government through the various electoral systems throughout the 27. So it was also made very clear that while the European Union is losing a country, if the issue is that Britain wants access to the single market, which is a very important entity of 450 million people, that it has got to adhere to the freedom of movement of people. And that's a problem and a challenge for Britain, because that was one of the central issues of the recent discussion around the referendum, the question of immigration and the limiting by Britain of numbers from the European Union being allowed to go into the UK. And of course, if you reflect on your history, over 60 countries gained their independence from the United Kingdom since 1776. When America gained its independence in Canada and Australia and Dominion status, then you had places like Afghanistan, Nepal, Burma, India, Ceylon, many countries in Africa, the Caribbean, Ireland, Israel, and so on like that. So these are countries which over the years have sent significant numbers to Britain. So in that sense, obviously, we want to reflect on that. So at that discussion, I made it perfectly clear that Ireland's priorities were our trading relationship, our common travel area, our open border, our peace process, the maintenance of that, and that people in this country do not want to see customs posts and a hard border such as you had in the past, which would be a very retrograde step, in my view, for the relationships between our peoples. It would be certainly an imposition or an obstacle to the continued, flourishing of a peace process which has been fragile at some times, and something that we need to be very careful about. The negotiations on withdrawal are unlikely to start immediately. They'll take some time. Obviously, there's a 2-year time frame envisaged in the treaties, but there's an extension of that applicable if the European Council say so. And to be realistic about this, I suppose that would have to be endorsed by all of the 27 countries, and that might take some little time beyond that. In the meantime, it's important to understand that Britain has not left the European Union and won't be an absent member until that's all finished. So until then, they pay their dues, they pay their charges, they retain their responsibilities as a full member of the European Union, and the citizens obviously retain the privileges of being a member of the European Union. So there is no immediate threat to the free flow of people, of goods or of services between these two islands. So just to make that very clear. Now, separate negotiations on the new relationship between the UK and the EU will also have to take place. And it's this second set of negotiations that such crucial questions as the UK's future trading relationship with the EU and the UK is going to be concerned, and where the movement of people to and from the UK, from the European Union, will actually be addressed. So it's expected that they will begin and sort of go in parallel with the withdrawal negotiations, if you know what I mean. Our starting point is straightforward. What we want is a stable, prosperous, outward-looking UK, and that's clearly in our interests and those of the European Union as a whole. The closer that the UK is to the European Union, the better for all of us, but particularly better for Ireland. In other words, the deal that has been there with some adjustments is possibly as good as you can get. So what we would like to see is that the eventual outcome should be that Britain remains as close to the single market as can be. But clearly I've outlined the challenges that are there. So it will be up to the UK and the new Prime Minister to spell out what the objective of Britain here is, what they want and what kind of format they would attempt to achieve or to obtain in these negotiations. What we would like as well, of course, is that these negotiations would be conducted in a constructive fashion, in a positive fashion, and that will also depend upon the approach from the United Kingdom itself. So we will be encouraging the British government to set realistic and achievable objectives and to build confidence in the good faith of the UK in this matter. Some media reports have indicated that there was a desire among European officials and institutions to impose a very harsh exit deal on the UK. I don't support that at all. This is a decision made by the people in Britain. While you mightn't like the decision, we accept that decision and we work on the basis of working out the best option and the best opportunities that arise from it. So it's in nobody's interest for the UK and the EU to have anything but the best possible relationships for the future. And any perception that the UK is being punished for a democratic decision to exit the European Union would only further inflame growing populist backlash against European integration. On the other hand, clearly, you can't have a situation where there's a perception of advantage being given to a country which leaves the European Union, because you could have other countries saying, well, if they're going to get an advantage like that over us, well, then maybe I should consider what I'm doing as well. And clearly, as you know, there are always tensions in different governments. You have proposals for referenda in a number of countries at the moment. You have proposals from different parties in support of governments in countries where there are difficulties. And all of this is a matter that needs to be considered very carefully. So for me, I think that we should instead focus on our collective attention on learning the lessons of recent years and reconnecting Europe to the new challenges faced by our populations, from global economic competition, from inadequate investment, from technological change, from excessive unemployment, from the threats and challenges of cybersecurity, of terrorist incidents, and all of these things. You know yourselves the economic devastation that can be brought about by one catastrophic incident. It's not acceptable that the levels of unemployment among young people in some countries are as high as 50%. It's not acceptable that the potential of any population or any country is not given full opportunity to flourish because of an inability to make political decisions that should be so. And we've had difficulties ourselves, of course, in this country where the recession impacted upon everybody because of the catastrophic situation that applied beforehand. But because of the sacrifices of the people, we're now in a better place. We still have much to do, of course. But it does mean that, for instance, in the area of health, last year you were in a position to allocate a further 300 million and a further 500 million this year to deal with the many challenges in there, waiting lists, or all of these emergency situations that arise. So in making these calls, I'm not alone, because other European leaders have been pointing out, why can't we change the way that business is done to make a bigger impact more quickly? And when you ask them, well, what would you do if you had the chance to do one thing for Europe? What would it be? Obviously, there are different views about the common agricultural policy, about the common fisheries policy, about the single market, about the digital market, how you impact on employment, whether you should have pressure to do this, that, or the other in relation to economics or taxation or whatever. We regard for instance, our corporation tax as being sacrosanct at 12.5%. Other countries appear to be moving towards that. I noticed the former Chancellor in Britain was talking about bringing corporation tax down below 15%, which would be in direct competition with a country like Ireland, where we're very attractive in many ways for foreign direct investment. You should remember that the United Kingdom, and England in particular, has been the most attractive location for foreign direct investment in Europe, the second biggest in the world. And these are opportunities that we have to think about, because competition, is very important. We're not a big country, but we've done very well in terms of the niche areas that we go after. Obviously, we want to protect our own interests, as I said. We will take forward these issues with the UK, but in many crucial areas, above all those where the EU has the strongest competence, such as trade, it will be the outcome of negotiations that are decisive. And trade is going to be where it's going to be at in particular. It impacts more on employment and all of these things. An ESRI study a couple of years back indicated that if 60,000 people didn't leave Ireland because of restrictions in Britain, that is, if the common travel area were to be abolished, it would have the impact of possibly reducing incomes here by about 4%. You can see the implication for a vote, how these things can apply. We should remember that the majority of our goods and our service exports to the euro area, 34%, the US 17%. The UK accounts for about 16% of our exports, which is very significant. And obviously numbers coming in from Britain here for hospitality and tourism and all of that speaks for itself. So while the UK remains a member of the single market until such time as the negotiations are concluded, and overall our trading relationship continues as normal, except for fluctuations in currency, where sterling goes down, therefore it's more costly. So currently fluctuations will present some challenges in the short term for small and medium enterprises and for the agri-sector in particular. And we've had government decisions about that, and indeed European Council decisions in respect of the dairy situation now, where the Commissioner and the Commission would be requested to reflect on the difficulties that many farmers are feeling. Enterprise Ireland, as you know, is the company that deals with exports out of Ireland. They're implementing a plan at the moment to help exporters in a short-term strategy that would identify other options to help manufacturing here that exports abroad. The impact of enterprise and trade in the border counties is something that will be monitored very closely. And as a part of that contingency plan, we've already had, working for quite some time, a dedicated unit in the Department of Agriculture to work on the relevant sectoral issues, be it beef or dairy or pork or whatever. And the Minister is convening a consultative committee of all of those involved. You have the beef forum and the dairy forum and all of that. So we're very conscious of what's going on there. Both BIA itself is producing practical advice for SMEs to assist them in dealing with a range of marketing challenges that arise and the management of volatility that can arise in the short term because of currency fluctuations and so on. Minister for Jobs and Enterprise is working to see that there's certainty as soon as possible in terms of the trading relationship, including the extent of access by the UK to the EU's single market. And that's a central issue of what will apply here. We remain a strong, open, competitive economy. Our talent pool, our competitive and consistent tax regime, our long track record of working with foreign companies all stands to us. The fact that Ireland is bilingual, well, English-speaking for the main, and a member of the EU and the Eurozone is also attractive. Here's the point. When Britain leaves the European Union, the only way that you can guarantee that English remains an official language of the European Union is because of Ireland. It requires unanimous support of countries for recognition of an official language. Isn't that an irony after so many years? And the IDA will continue to market Ireland across the globe as the number one location for foreign direct investment. And I have to say that, speaking to the IDA personnel, the pipeline is very strong and will continue to be very strong for the time ahead in the context of attractiveness for foreign direct investment here. Social progress depends on a strong economy. You can't do it unless you have the resources to do these things. We should never take our economy for granted, and Brexit is a case in point. Everything beginning to look very well. Suddenly there's an unknown, unforeseen quantity here that we have to reflect on. Obviously, the policies that brought us this far may, because of the decision of our neighbours, they might be insufficient to take us to the next stage of the journey. So we've got to be very cognizant of this, and that's why you need a comprehensive response from the entire from the entire government. And that's why I've said to Ministers Noonan and O'Donoghue in terms of the finance and public expenditure to ensure that the upcoming budget in October is shaped by and addresses the challenges resulting from Brexit, and to set out a national economic response here. And this will have particular reference to the need to strengthen further the competitiveness of our personal and our corporate tax regimes for mobile investment and for skills, the opportunity to build on the strong public support in Ireland for EU membership, 86% of the last poll, as a magnet for international investors seeking certainty and stability, which is what they look for, the need to protect the strong recoveries in our tourism, in our agribusiness, and other regional employment-intensive sectors in recent years, and the need to further diversify our export markets. We need young people, energetic, who have a know-how to be able to open new markets in countries where we haven't been that strong in the past. Now, I'd like to say, we also recognise the outcome that the UK referendum causes particular problems to your neighbour here in Northern Ireland. I fully understand why many people in Northern Ireland are deeply concerned at the prospect of Northern Ireland being outside of a project that has delivered so much for political stability, for reconciliation and for economic prosperity. So we will continue to work urgently and intensively, both with the British government and with the Northern Ireland Executive, to see how collectively we can ensure that the gains of the last 20 years or more are fully protected in whatever new arrangements are negotiated. All three administrations, the Executive in Northern Ireland, the Government and the British Government, share the common objective of wanting to preserve the common travel area and an open border on the island of Ireland. You do not want to see a European border running from Dundalk to Derry. Nobody wants to see that. And while issues of trade are not easy, we do not want to see a hard border in terms of what was there previously. I believe that the common travel area was first mentioned way back in the Treaty of Amsterdam, which, if you like, gives it a sort of a legal status in one way that we will have to explore further. Because I do think that both countries being outside the Schengen area allows us to have that bilateral arrangement for the preservation of the common travel area. And Prime Minister Cameron was very strong on this in the lead up to the referendum and afterwards, and I mentioned this specifically to Prime Minister May when I spoke to her just last week. Now, the North-South Ministerial Council on the 4th of July in Dublin agreed to work together to see that Northern Ireland's interests are protected and that the importance of North-South cooperation is fully recognised in any new arrangements that come about. We outlined 10 specific actions there that were agreed to optimise North-South joint planning and engagement on a whole range of issues arising from the UK result. And these will include a full audit of North-South work programmes to establish risks and likely impacts arising from their decision. Secondly, I believe strongly, the government believes, that there is a need in these circumstances for the widest possible conversation on the implications of the referendum result for Ireland North and South and for North-South relations, and we will continue to explore options to achieve this in a way that is non-divisive. I respect fully the rights of every political party to have their view. Way back in the 1980s, when the late Garret Fitzgerald put together the New Ireland Forum, all of the parties did not participate in that, and yet it went ahead. And out of that came the Anglo-Irish Agreement at the end of that process. So we need to ensure that all the voices are heard here, all of the voices, all political parties throughout the island, inside and outside government, as well as civil society, the non-governmental organisations and business. It's really important that we have everybody's view and that they be enabled to express that view so that we can have the best possible argument to put up as to why we continue to have an open border and the issues that are important to us north and south. And remember that in a trading sense, the Republic of Ireland is actually more important to the north than vice versa, because it's important for Northern Ireland business exporters to be able to test markets and to supply down south as they do in a very great way. So there will be a broader public consultation, including on an all-island inclusive basis, and an ongoing engagement with other parties in the Oireachtas, as well as with the Brexit stakeholders group, which has already been meeting for some time now. Now, as part of the, if you like, the new politics, twice in the last 3 weeks, I was able to call together 9 leaders of the opposition parties and opposition groups in the Oireachtas and say, here's the story, here's the information, this is what we have to date, so you want to share this. Because in fairness to them, they need to be able to talk to their party leaders and their groupings in Europe so that they understand what Ireland's position is. So in that sense, it's important to understand that there's a wearing of the green here, if you like, in Ireland's sense, in the island of Ireland's sense, and that's something that we feel important. Now, nearly finished. Of course, we recognise the real challenges that are presented from living in a border region. Here in Donegal and in other border counties, these impacts are already being felt. The current weak sterling is having an impact on consumer spending patterns. You can see this beginning to emerge already. Small local businesses are often the first to feel the effect of sterling versus euro fluctuations. These are real impacts on everyday life. So obviously we want to monitor very carefully in local economies what's happening here in the weeks and the months ahead. The local enterprise offices, our enterprise agency regional offices, and the measures contained in our own regional action plan for jobs will be activated to assist local businesses where that's possible. And that's why it's important we hear from these businesses, that we understand their particular, problems, concerns and anxieties. Let me assure you that the preservation of the common travel area and the preservation of the free movement of goods and people and services across these islands remains a top priority for the government and will. I believe that the benefits of these arrangements are also highly valued by the United Kingdom Government and the Northern Ireland Executive. We've already been talking at political and official level with our colleagues in the UK and at the North-South Ministerial Council about how best we can work together on these issues in the time ahead. Of course, the closer the future relationship is between the UK and the EU, the better for all of us it will be across these islands. So we have to wait and see what the British government actually set out as their statement of intent as to what they want to achieve. So we remain very deeply committed to ongoing cross-border cooperation and to honouring the commitments that we made as part of last year's Fresh Start agreement to investing in all island infrastructure. We had these discussions in Stormont, both with the then Prime Minister and myself, and with Minister Flanagan on our behalf, and many of the other discussions that took place with all the parties. And that includes our own government's £75 million investment in the A5 project to improve ease of access to the northwest of the island. This, if you like, is a key enabler of our regional ambitions for growing tourism and growing jobs. You're aware of the impact, for many reasons, of the Wild Atlantic Way and what that conjures up in people's minds. They're coming from all over the world. So here's an opportunity for a country that is, expressing itself in so many ways now to benefit from these things. The first phase of this project from New Mills to north of Strabane is scheduled to commence in 2017, and we will work and must work alongside the Northern Ireland Executive and the UK Government with the EU institutions to ensure that there is no uncertainty about the availability of EU co-funding for this and for other infrastructural investments and commitments that will arise from future withdrawal of the EU, from the EU. And this applies also with regard to the projects that are already committed under the Peace and Interreg programmes. We negotiated those on behalf of Europe and Northern Ireland and the Republic during the first 6 months of 2013, I think, when we held the presidency, part of a €960 billion budget. But you have difficulties now and problems beginning to arise where, when you look at programmes up ahead, and let's say the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform is bound to put money up front. If you're going to have a withdrawal from the EU, are you going to have consequent funding coming through at the end of it? And this is causing, complications and challenges. What do you do in cases like this? You can't expect that would happen without having that degree of certainty. So those who suggested during the recent campaign that there would be no adverse financial impact arising from a leave vote now have a responsibility to work to ensure that this will be the case and will be seen to be the case. There were specific assurances given that there would be no change. Well, there are some challenges up ahead, and those who are of that view need to be able to address that really well. And this should include the commitments that we made to enhance strategic and coherent approaches to development across the Northwest region. As part of the Fresh Start agreement last year, we agreed to support the regional development work of the North West Gateway Initiative involving Donegal County Council and Derry City and Strabane District Council. The Government is committed to allocating €2.5 million to the North West Development Fund, and we are talking, as the Chairman will know, to our colleagues in the Northern Ireland Executive about matching funding here. So while there's always room to do more, there are some real and practical examples where cross-border cooperation is making a real difference to people's lives, including in this part of the country here. I'm thinking in particular of important initiatives in cross-border medical services. The radiotherapy unit, as you know, that's being developed at Altnagelvin in Derry on a joint basis between the governments north and south, will provide important access to radiotherapy services for people in Donegal and throughout the northwest region in general. That's to be welcomed. Earlier this year, we also saw the introduction of an important new cross-border cardiology service, which will give Donegal patients suffering from the STEMI heart attack direct access to services in Altnagelvin Hospital in Derry. And the All-Ireland Congenital Heart Disease, the clinical network that's being developed as an initiative of the Ministers for Health North and South, will also be of benefit to people on the island of Ireland. And that was opened in Crumlin recently by the Minister for Health. So we'll work all the harder in this post-referendum period to ensure that the benefits of the peace process in Northern Ireland are preserved and that we continue to build on that in the time ahead. It's an important position, given the strength of our relationship with the UK on the one hand and our connectedness to the EU on the other. If you like, Ireland stands at the elbow here. One arm leads to the United Kingdom, the other arm leads to the other direction leads to the European Union, and obviously we're at a pivotal point for both. So we need to preserve that and understand just what Ireland actually brings to these negotiations. So obviously there are issues that we need to look at as well that have not been thought of. You know, we have an all-Ireland electricity market since 2007. An interconnection between Ireland and Northern Ireland is particularly important to Northern Ireland, which relies on electricity imports from the Republic to make up for insufficient local electricity generation capacity. These are issues that are of great concern. When the UK leaves the European Union, presumably it would no longer be subject to EU rules on climate change policy and renewables. And outside the European Union, there might be less chance that they would reopen discussions on trade in renewables. Obviously, when the UK leaves the Union, it would no longer be subject to EU regulatory measures to deal with a possible crisis in the case of gas or oil shortage, as pointed out in an ESRI report a couple of years back. Ireland would then have to consider how best to provide protection from very unlikely but potentially catastrophic outcomes. While they would be unlikely, they need to be looked at. And clearly, when Britain would leave the European Union, according to the same report, it would no longer be subject to EU rules on climate change policy and renewables, and this would raise the possibility that they might change those rules, which would have implications here for us in Ireland. Obviously, also in terms of gas and gas storage and gas capacity, here's an issue where we are completely dependent upon interconnection from the United Kingdom, and this is an area that is of immense importance to business and the economy in general. So you don't want a situation where all of these things might happen, and yet while the probability is that they would not, we need to take them into account in terms of where we're thinking. I might just say as well, you've got quite a number of MEPs elected from the United Kingdom to the European Parliament. They're not going to be involved once Britain actually leaves. You have to make a decision as to how they're going to be reallocated, or what happens to the numbers of seats there that to be redistributed or whatever else. Obviously, we have lots of Irish students attending in colleges in Britain. When they leave, what's the situation there? Will this continue to be applicable in the way that it is now? And also, I think it's important to say that the Brexit poll, is not a legally binding poll, but is politically binding, and the government intend to go ahead and implement it. And if that's the case, I know there's a deal of work going on now in terms of what is the status of legally binding agreements that are internationally lodged for many years from Britain. And if they confer rights or benefits upon citizens as a consequence of those international agreements, do they still stand up when Britain is no longer a member of the European Union, where those agreements might have been part of the treaties, or might have been lodged internationally with that particular status? And here's another one. Obviously, I have not favoured the holding of a border poll, because the Good Friday Agreement sets out very clearly the circumstances under which that would apply. And those circumstances are that there should be clearly in evidence a wish on a majority of the people in Northern Ireland to leave the United Kingdom. So, the British government will now proceed ahead over a period of time to leave the European Union. So, what happens at some point in the future, where it might be evident that a majority of people in Northern Ireland wanted to leave the United Kingdom and join the Republic in an all-island situation. Not to happen now, it may happen in the future. That would mean that people in a region who voted to stay would be no longer members of the European Union and wanting to disengage from the United Kingdom and join the Republic of Ireland. It may be, in the eyes of some, a fanciful theory, but who knows what happens in 10, 15, 20 years' time, or whatever. So in the same way as it was possible for the former East Germany to be associated with West Germany and not to have to go through a very long and tortuous process to join the European Union, and these negotiations should take these kinds of things into account as well. So that if that were to ever become a reality, that it would have been foreseen that at some time that might be necessary. These are all parts of the discussions that will have to take place over the time ahead. So, having said those few words to you, I just want you to understand that for our part, we will work assiduously and very diligently in trying to get an overall picture of what the future holds. And believe me, when I have the privilege of sitting at the European Council table with now 27, formerly 28, and a long list wanting to join, there are very different views expressed around that table about where we should be in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And when you look at the difficulties politically in many countries, both within and on the fringes and beyond the borders of Europe, you can understand that it's very necessary to keep a firm hand on the tiller here. Louis MacNeice said one time, by a high star our course is set. So let's follow that. Let's follow that star, where hopefully we can bring about a situation where there's prosperity, peace, and opportunity for all the citizens, both of the United Kingdom and of the European Union. For my part, I'll do what I can to see that that happens. Thank you.